So here are our three big stories for today. This is going to be an extended cut. Russia has broken the stalemate in Ukraine, says a former U.S. Defense Secretary. This is Robert Gates. Robert Gates was both the head of the CIA and the former Secretary of Defense. He's nonpartisan, so I listened to his perspective very carefully because he's not trying to score political points in any way. He's trying to observe and analyze and give a proper assessment. It's no longer a stalemate. The Russians have regained momentum, Gates told the Washington Post in a streaming interview. Everything I'm reading is that the Russians are on the offensive along the 600-mile front. Well, this is what Putin's saying. He's giving 3 weeks to seize the entire region of Ukraine. Of course, as I pointed out this morning in my daily brief, they're on their 34th 3-week special military operation. So I'm not sure what the 35th is going to look like, but they do have momentum. The first major victory in months. It's been its most significant gain since taking Bakhmut last spring. But again, it took 4 or 5 months to get to this place. But they do have momentum, and the Ukrainians are running low on ammunition, and that's the key point. President Biden pinned the blame for Ukraine battlefield losses directly on House Republicans who have refused to back additional aid to Kyiv without major immigration reform. That's going to be important. We're going to come back to that at the very end of this. Gates noted that European allies in NATO, who we so often criticize, have stepped up their efforts to support Ukraine. And that's a really important point. Seeing that we had pulled back, the Europeans really did step up in a meaningful way. But there's a problem here. But the lack of ability to immediately send weapons is the problem. Production timelines will see NATO support reach the battlefield in 2025. He estimated. It takes a while to ramp this process up. And Europe has done something else that they shouldn't have done. They've tried to say, okay, we're going to supply you with 1 million shells, but we're going to home grow these shells. They could source those shells elsewhere, but they decided to keep that money in the European economy. And in doing that, they've created a whole different problem set where instead of providing 1 million shells by next month, they provided about 300,000. Maybe we're up to 400,000 at this point, but far short of the 1 million that were promised by next month. Right now, the only real military lifeline comes from the United States. And as we all know, that is, shall we say, on pause right now. Again, he's being diplomatic. It's really bogged down. Gates called out Congress specifically for being too slow on improving key battlefield capabilities throughout the war, such as missile systems that have allowed strikes against Russian-occupied Crimea, which he called a no-brainer. Well, yeah, give them what they need in order for them to be successful. But we've been far too slow. By the time they get there, it should have been there a long time ago. The timing of the current aid package, Biden requested a $60 billion supplemental, which was part of a bipartisan Senate package passed earlier this month, is going to be a determining factor in Ukraine's survival against revived Russian offensive in 2024. That Russian offensive appears to have started. There's movement across the line of contact. I'm not sure that they've gained any ground, but they're pushing on Ukraine, and Ukraine only has but so much to be able to push back. He concludes that one of the main values of the package of assistance that's on the Hill right now is that it would provide Ukraine with significant air defense capacity and the wherewithal to establish a strong defensive barrier so they don't lose any more territory. What we have done, I think, when the story of the war in Ukraine has been written, it will show that we've been too slow to come to Ukraine's aid. And I don't mean just the United States, although the United States is very slow right now. I mean, the world has been too slow to deter Putin's aggression in a meaningful way. Okay, second story we're going to move on to. House is heading toward a nuclear war, not that kind of nuclear war, over Ukraine funding, one top House GOP leader says. So let's shift gears and focus just in on what's going on in Congress. So there's a 50-50 chance of a government shutdown in early March, says the House Financial Services Chairman Patrick McHenry of North Carolina. So Patrick McHenry, if you don't know who he was, after McCarthy was ousted, McHenry was the temporary Speaker of the House placeholder. He wasn't the speaker, but he was the person appointed to become that person, and he could navigate the various votes for the speaker until a new speaker was put in place. He's no slouch. And it's House Speaker Mike Johnson's fear of being ousted that will determine the outcome. Now remember, because McCarthy was ousted, now Speaker Johnson's pretty nervous that this could happen to him. At the same time, McHenry says that the House is heading to a procedural nuclear war over funding for Ukraine. The majority in the House of Representatives actually support funding for Ukraine. So why is one person, I get this question all the time, I don't understand how one man is able to just stop it. So theoretically, the way the system works is that a majority have voted for the speaker, and so he has the will of the majority. But it's not really working out that way, because on this issue with Ukraine, they're split between kind of the old guard Republicans like me and the Trump MAGA Republicans, and there's a split there. So the old guard Republicans and Democrats actually want the same thing. Old guard Republicans doesn't mean moderate, it just means pre-Trump Republicans. There could be some moderates, but there could be some very conservative types like myself that are in that category of old guard Republicans. So there's a majority that actually wants this, but the will of the majority is bound in the Speaker of the House, who gets to determine what the agenda is for the House of Representatives. I hope that makes some sense. It's a preventable disaster. Had we done this in November and December, the policy would be about the same, maybe a little bit better than it is now. But the politics would be much better than they are now, he added. McHenry said that Johnson is still adjusting to the difficulties of leading a small and restive GOP majority. It's a very small majority, and it got even smaller since he took office. Fear of losing his speakership stalks all shutdown scenarios, he said. All the speaker has to do is allow the Appropriations Committee to go get a deal, McHenry said. We will have a deal by March 1st and March 8th. If we just allow momentum to occur. If the speaker wishes to stop it for whatever reason, we'll probably have a government shutdown. Okay, the government shutdown would be bad. It would paralyze us going forward for even more time. We don't need to slow down this aid to Ukraine, and that would be part of slowing things down. Okay, the House of Representatives is in recess until February 28th. So McHenry concludes that if it's fear of the deal that drives him, that will then result in a government shutdown. It's real and legitimate fear because the last guy was taken out, McHenry said, before offering something akin to advice to Johnson. Quote, "You can either die as speaker and worry about them taking you out, or live every day as your last. Get something out of it. If you lead and get big things done, your reputation enhances. Your ability to get the next deal done is enhanced. The view from the public, while not perfect, is better if you take action than if you sit and dither." And I think he's right about that. McHenry said the House Republicans remain disorganized in the wake of McCarthy's departure. McCarthy was highly successful in the 10 months of his speakership. McHenry said, "We didn't have a single failed rule. Since then, we've had 5 rules fail, which is a terrible mark for a majority." Now he explains what that means. The House typically functions at the direction of the majority party. It sets the legislative agenda and enforces the rules under which bills are debated. If you're in charge, you dictate the terms of debate. If you don't pass that rule, you have in essence handed the House floor over to the minority party to do what they will. McHenry also said that there's a sizable majority of House Republicans and Democrats who support the Senate-passed national security bill that includes military aid to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. They support 80 to 90% of what's in the bill, McHenry said. About 2/3 of the House is of that opinion. It'll get done. It will just be a question of how it gets done and how long it takes to get done. I've been saying that and saying that and saying that. Biden has said that. McCall has said that. Here McHenry is saying that. Don't just believe me. What's axiomatic about the House is that any speaker can stand in the way of the majority will on the House floor for a period of time, but not permanently, McHenry said. My hope is that the speaker will come around to seeing this in a very sensible way. Okay, so that's what's going on in Congress. Now, let's shift gears to the immigration side of this and look at what Biden might be thinking about, which could be huge for Biden politically. Biden weighs invoking executive authority to stage border crackdown ahead of the 2024 election. Well, it was Biden that actually reversed Trump-era policies that created much of the immigration inflow. Now, I know some other people have said, well, no, it just goes up and down with the economy, and that is true to a degree, but that's not the whole thing. When Biden came into office, one of the first executive orders that he put in place reversed the Trump-era executive orders on immigration, and that changed the immigration flow significantly. Now, President Biden is debating whether to invoke sweeping presidential authority that gained infamy during the Trump administration to stage crackdown on migrants coming to the U.S. southern border. 3 people familiar with the plans told CBS News. Again, this is CBS, this isn't Fox News. Mr. Biden is weighing citing a law dating back to 1952 that severely restricted access to the U.S. asylum system, which has buckled under the weight of record levels of migrant arrivals along the border with Mexico, because he changed the policy. The law, known as 212F, allows the president to, quote, suspend the entry, unquote, of foreigners when it is determined that their arrival is not in the best interest of the country. The Trump administration used the law several times, and again, Biden undid it. If approved, Mr. Biden's executive action could be announced within the next 2 weeks. Now, there's timing here. So one of the things that motivates Trump voters most is immigration, the southern border. And if they're motivated by that and they vote for Trump in record numbers compared to Haley about the southern border, if they can get this done before Super Tuesday and deflate the momentum from Trump, it could have a significant impact on the election. Any significant restriction on asylum would face formidable legal and operational hurdles. Still, issuing an executive order designed to curb illegal crossings at the U.S.-Mexico border could be seen as an important political message from Mr. Biden ahead of the 2024 election. The executive order would also cement a dramatic immigration policy pivot by Mr. Biden, who vowed to restore the U.S. asylum system soon after taking office in 2021. After record levels of migrant apprehensions along the southern border in the past 3 years and growing discontent in Democratic-led cities receiving migrants, Mr. Biden's administration has embraced some restrictions on asylum. Okay, so in my estimation, this is the tool in Biden's toolbox that can take Trump's momentum down a notch or start to diffuse Trump's momentum. And if he can do this before we get too far into the primary season, it can have a significant impact on the election. Okay, those are the 3 big stories, and these are big stories in how they impact Ukraine. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, and the subscribes, and the coffees. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.